Okay guys, here we are again, Miss Levy, finishing up with 7.2 about the differences between nation-state, multi-ethnic state, multinational state, stateless nation, and how centripetal and centrifugal forces affect these. So back to this idea of the multinational state, like we just talked about in the previous video. These are basically similar to multi-ethnic states, so you have diversity there, but the difference is those ethnicities at some point in their long history, they were independent countries that either by choice or by force, they gave up that independence to be part of a larger country. So the reason why the United States is multi-ethnic and not multinational is because at no point in the history of the United States, when we were an actual country, has any part of our country been independent state. So for example, that would have to be like at some point in the history of the United States, California was its own country and elected to give up that independence to be part of the much larger country of the United States. That has not happened. Same thing like you would argue is in Japan. Japan is not a multinational state because there's no part of Japan that in their long history was ever part of its own country and then gave up that independence either by choice or by force to be a part of its own, be a part of a larger country. So, so they were independent, and they've elected to divide power, but they still recognize those distinct nationalities as part of the history. So like we just talked about in the previous video, the largest multinational state currently is Russia. There are parts of Russia today that were once independent, and it's really by force. You could argue like the part of Ukraine that they just annexed that used to be an independent country. They've now claimed it as part of Russia. So that makes it a multinational state. United Kingdom, same thing. At some point in the history, England was its own country. Scotland was its own country. Wales was its own country. And Northern Ireland was part of Ireland. And either by force or by choice, all of those entities, England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland, elected to give up that independence to form the larger countries of the UK. And historically, the USSR, the former Soviet Union, that was also a multinational state. There were many, including Afghanistan. These were territories. They were at one point independent countries, and they elected to give up that independence either by choice or force to be part of the Soviet Union. This can oftentimes result in war for independence like it did in the Soviet Union. Afghanistan was the first country to break apart from the Soviet Union, and then from that, much of the Eastern Bloc from Czech Republic, so Czechoslovakia broke apart, Bulgaria broke apart, and then from there many others did as well. So you tend to see a lack of unity in these countries. Many countries broke free from Russia. Even today, there are groups that are trying to break away from Russia, although Russia's not letting them. So just as much as multi-ethnic states, multinational states will have significant centrifugal forces because of that history of self-rule, that history of independence. That's very hard for countries to elect to give that up. Just like in the UK, Scotland just recently had a referendum to try to break free from the UK. They lost with just a very small margin of votes. But they do also have some centripetal forces. It's just the centrifugal forces are stronger. So this brings us next to this idea of the stateless nation. So this is a nation, a group of people with homogeneity in ethnicity and culture who are stateless, meaning that they want their own territory. They have claims to a territory, but they don't have recognized territory. Remember, to be a country, you must have both recognized territory and self-rule. So free to rule themselves without the influence or without the authority of another group. So when we look at stateless nations, the Kurds are the one of the largest stateless nations, if not the largest stateless nation. This is a group of people who are in Iraq, Iran, and Turkey. They are the largest minority in Turkey. And then you have the Palestinians who are in Israel. Excuse me. And then you have the Basque people of Spain, northern Spain. And this typically creates a conflict over land. And they have centrifugal forces in that they are the centrifugal force in a country. They are the group of people who are trying to break away from a country. They have a lot of centripetal forces, just like a nation state, because they have homogeneity in language and in shared history and in ethnicity. And then they also have this us versus them mentality. There's no greater unifying force than an us versus them mentality. So us would be them against whoever is the ruling group of the country. So for the Palestinians, the us would be the Palestinians, and then them would be the government of Israel. For the Kurds, the us, the unifying force would be the Kurdish population, and the them would be Iraq, Iran, and Turkey. And the same with the Basque. The us would be the Basque, and then the them would be Spain. So excuse me, this brings us to this idea of centripetal forces. As Mr. Fuster told you, these are the forces within a country that unite the people to support the state, the government of the country. And please see Mr. Fuster's video for examples of that. But like we said, there are many, many. If there's common ethnicity, common language, common religion, there are symbols of national pride, like the Statue of Liberty or Lincoln Memorial for us, the Washington Memorial, Washington, D.C. itself. There are physical geography factors for the United States. It would be there would be like the Mississippi River, the Grand Canyon. For a country like India, centripetal force, which physical features would be like the Ganges River, which unites and is sacred to the Hindus. And so when we look at the difficulty in defining these, we look at which type of state should have the most centripetal forces. Again, this would be the nation state. And which would be the least would probably be between multi-ethnic and multinational states. These countries with centrifugal forces, these are forces within a country that divide the people and cause conflict, war, and dissent. These are the forces that anger the people to react against the government of the country. People are disappointed in their country. Again, examples would be when you look at centrifugal forces and centripetal forces, you can't say like religion is a centripetal force. It has to be within context. Shared religion is a centripetal force. Diverse religions in the same country especially if they have diverging beliefs and they have ties to the same land, like in Israel, this is a centrifugal force. Language can be a centripetal force when it's shared. When there are many different languages, that's a centrifugal force. Whenever you have a common political system and shared political system and views, that's a centripetal force. But when you have diverging or differing political views and you have discrimination, that's centrifugal force. So what happens if there are more centrifugal forces than centripetal forces? Typically, you'll have war, you'll have conflict, you'll have dissent, and it can result in the breakup of the country like it did in Yugoslavia, in the Balkan Peninsula, which we'll study a bit more about coming up in Chapter 8. But can also be with the Soviet Union when the centrifugal forces were greater than the centripetal and it broke apart. These factors can, even whenever you have a situation like India and the Hindus and the Muslims in Pakistan, that's a centrifugal force for the Muslims who live in India and the Hindus who live in Pakistan. Or the Hindus, or the Hutus and Tutsis in Rwanda, that ethnic diversity, that was a centrifugal force. In Bosnia, the differences between the Muslims, the Serbs and the Croats, that was a centrifugal force with the ethnic differences. In Kosovo, between the ethnic Albanians and the Serbs, that was a centrifugal force. So this concludes our video about the differences between defining nationality. Let's go back to the top here. Nationality, nation, state, nation-state, multi-ethnic state, multinational state, stateless nation, centripetal, and centrifugal forces. For the conflicts coming up next, I want you to make sure that you have added into the conflicts chart, I want you to add those centripetal and centrifugal forces that existed in each. And then on the assignment that we did from class about the identifying if the countries in your group were a nation state, a multi-ethnic state, or multinational state, I want you to now add examples of centripetal and centrifugal forces to each of those examples.